from this computer. There we go. Okay, so welcome to the June 30th Next Generation Leadership Institute webinar. We are pleased to bring you Randy Frazier today for a presentation on communication. Since none of you know Randy, I feel like we could probably do the round robin of our introductions. We'll go ahead and start if that works out for everybody. Randy, I'm Sunny Heike-Snapton, Program Manager for the Next Generation Leadership Institute, calling in from Montana. Let's see, Barbara, you want to go ahead and go?
Yeah, sure. Good afternoon or good morning, wherever. Barbara Bleiweiss in Charlotte, North Carolina with Mecklenburg Soil and Water Conservation District. I did get your, I thought it was a wedding invitation or a thank you. So, who is this? I'm really anxious to, I made sure I had your questions. I'm ready to answer your questions, but I'm very excited to meet you and I look forward to a great session.
Thank you, Barbara. Thank you.
Okay, Phil, how about you?
Hello, everyone. Phil Campbell here from Luther, Oklahoma. Serve on the Oklahoma County Conservation District Board there, as well as the State Board and the Oklahoma Conservation Commission. Mr. Frazier, that was an excellent touch. True professional. I can't wait to hear this communication.
Thank you, Phil. Thank you very much.
Great. Okay, next on my screen is Joe.
Hi, Joe Coughlin, North Central Oklahoma, serve on the K County Conservation District and our state association, and fourth generation farmer rancher. Just really looking forward to this session, Randy, and glad you joined us today.
Thank you. Thank you very much,
Thanks,
Joe.
Joe. All right, how about you, Ryan?
All right, Ryan Britt. I think I'm the Joe of North Central Missouri, but Randolph County Soil and Water District, Missouri Association Soil and Water President, and row crop and cattle farmer, and just excited to be on board with you guys today.
Excellent.
Thanks, Ryan. Mark.
Hey, good afternoon. Mark Masters from Southwest Georgia, a little town called Dawson. Beef cattle farmer, lived here all my life. Serve on the Lower Chattahoochee Soil and Water Conservation District, and also on the state board for Georgia. When I'm not doing that, I run the Georgia Water Planning and Policy Center and fiddle around with all things water in the Southeast. Happy to be here and happy to have you with us, Randy.
Thank you so much.
Carla, I can see that you're muted and your video is off, but do you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yes, sorry guys, I'm in the middle of lunch, so I have the camera off for right now. But Carla Maldonado, NACD, I'm out of the DC office. I'm the Managing Director of Operations and have been for the past 3 years. So have enjoyed working with NACD and seeing all the different programs and increasing participation and engagement with our members. And so thank you, Sunny, for the invitation to join. And thank you, Randy. Look forward to the webinar.
Okay, Jeremy and Randy, you helped me with this one. So I know Jeremy, we've asked to provide a little bit of an update from the standpoint of the National Conservation Foundation. And then Randy, we obviously are really excited to hear from you. Jeremy, does it make most sense to just have you start us off, and then Randy, when you get into your component of it, give us a background of who you are and where you're at?
Sounds good. Thanks, Sunny, and it's really good to see everybody again today. Randy, good to be with you. I think the last time that we visited was in Little Rock back in 2016 at the State Association Executive Directors Conference, and you did a masterful job at that meeting, and I know you've got a great presentation in store for us this afternoon. It's good to see you again, and thanks for being part of the webinar for today. So I serve as both the CEO for NACD as well as the Executive Director for the National Conservation Foundation, and very delighted to continue to see the NGLI program continue to make progress, and especially in light of the challenges of this year. It's in my mind, it's an example of leadership in action, and really overcoming the challenges of today, and still focused on the opportunities of tomorrow. And so my hat's off continue for this group, and really look forward to today's webinar. The one thing I wanted to visit on just a little bit, and I believe that there was a discussion maybe within the last couple of weeks, just to get input from the NGLI participants about future programming and what you guys are hopeful for, what you want to see in terms of content, but also thinking ahead to next year, recognizing that this year has, it's not gone exactly as we had planned. We had a lot of other things in store for this year in terms of face-to-face meetings, and that's also been something that's been on the mind of the National Conservation Foundation trustees, and they had a very good discussion during their spring teleconference last month, and just talked about some various options for the pathway forward. And Sunny was able to join in that conversation and provide some of her input and some of the feedback that you had provided even at that point. And the executive committee for the foundation has also continued that discussion. Right now, of course, the foundation is looking ahead to next year, to their budget for next year, but also to the programs that budget will support. And the trustees will take up that budget next month in their summer mid-year meeting. But for right now, until that action, the direction that things appear to be going is very good. Very strong support, of course, for this program. A lot of hopes for the future, but also looking ahead to next year and really wanting to press the reset button and complete this year, of course, do all the activities that we can to continue to engage you and provide meaningful content and opportunities, but also thinking that next year, assuming that we can get back to somewhat of a normal operation, that for 2021 we would just hit the reset button, keep the same cohort in place, assuming that you all wish to remain part of the program, and just start back up in 2021 with the face-to-face meetings in New Orleans, and hopefully get the other sessions in that we've had to postpone for this year. So I believe that also was some of the thoughts that you expressed on your most recent discussion. So I'm pleased to share with you that seems to be the direction that the foundation is going. Again, no final decision. They'll take that up next month during their summer meeting to approve their budget and all the things that will provide for. But just wanted to give you an update for today, let you know that there continues to be strong support to both continue this program and at some point in the future to grow it and build upon the great work that you're already achieving this year. So I'm happy to answer any questions or any discussion on that topic. And if there are none, I will not keep you from Mr. Randy Frazier for another second.
Good. Thank you, Jeremy. Appreciate it.
Okay, good. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think, from the conversations that we've had with this group previously, although everybody was willing to welcome new members, I think that the recognition was that keeping the group as it is currently is a great strategy. And that I'm glad to hear that the board is good with that approach as well. And I think we'll, with the continuation of this year, the request for, the somewhat check-ins, if we can include an additional webinar. I think what's nice right now is that there's so many other entities that are doing webinars that are really well aligned with our work, I think that's an option that we also have. So, and just as a kind of an update to everyone, I have spoken with Noble Research Institute in Oklahoma, and they are very receptive to us postponing for a year. And they actually said it would be kind of interesting for us to consider some of the topics that we could discuss in November of 2021, because they are seeing shifts in their operation due to COVID, and they're learning a lot about the leadership elements that are going into those discussions. So that was a good conversation to have. So I think all the stars are kind of aligning with us moving forward in a really positive direction, and I appreciate the update from the board. Any other questions for Jeremy or comments or thoughts?
We're good.
Great, thanks. I see Cassius has joined us. Thank you, it's good to see you. Do you want to give yourself, give an introduction of yourself? So Randy Frazier is familiar with who you are and where you're from.
Hi, Randy. I'm Cassius from the great state of Rhode Island. I sit on a couple of boards here. One is the Southern District Conservation, as well as the Rhode Island State Conservation Office as well. I'm a member of the Narragansett tribe, the only tribe here in Rhode Island. And I'm a producer, farmer. I do a lot with crops. I've done cow-calf operations and a little bit of oyster farming here on the East Coast as well. But I keep pretty busy, and I tell you, with all this that's going on, it's been one Zoom meeting after another.
Yeah.
That's the truth. Okay, well, we're at 1:15 and on track, and we all see each other. If you are experiencing any technical difficulties, whatever you need to do to log in, log out, we'll adjust, and we will officially give the floor to you, Randy. Ray, I'm not going to introduce you. You know everybody. You always know everybody. So we're just so glad to have you, and thanks to Ray for helping to make the connection with Randy. And we are still recording, and Randy, go ahead and take it away.
We are ready to go, Sonny, and it's an honor to be with y'all today. As the song says, we've got a long way to go and a short time to get there. So we're going to dive right in by asking the questions. And for time's sake, I've asked folks to just think about a one-sentence answer. And I would ask the cohort who would volunteer their one-sentence answer to that question. How does a good speaker become a great speaker?
I'll just offer I can be first. Learning from your failures, practice and learning from your failures.
Excellent answer. Excellent answer, Barbara. Anyone else want to tell us your one sentence answer, how to get from good to great as a speaker?
Sure. This is Joe. I jotted down, know your subject, be prepared, and
Excellent. Cassius, do you have an answer for that?
Well, I've been told most of my life, just be a good listener. Helps to be a good speaker.
And you're a fan of Ken Blanchard, and I really noticed that in your bio. I appreciated that. Well, let me broaden the subject now and ask, how many speeches and presentations have you heard in your life? And that should be a pretty short answer. Who wants to give me an answer?
Well, I'll go first again. Tens of thousands. I don't think I could pinpoint it. Just having been in sales for many years, all you do is give presentations.
That's
so
right.
I would say tens of thousands for me.
Tens of thousands. Good answer, Barbara. How about someone else?
Yes, this is Bill. I have to agree. Tens of thousands of presentations, speeches over the course of a year.
Yeah. And when you count everything, I mean everything from not just conferences, but PTA meetings and church meetings and everything, I think Barbara had a pretty good answer. I don't know if Jeremy is still with us, but I bet his answer would be pretty large in response. If Jeremy is there, or I remember I asked this question a week ago when I was talking with Ray and Sonny. And Sonny, what was your answer to how many you think you've heard?
Thousands.
Thousands. And so tell me the answer to the third question, Sonny. Out of thousands of presentations, how many of them do you remember?
It's real. Could I replicate it myself?
The main points. If you could make
Five.
a block outline for that.
Yeah, the block outline, 5.
5 out of thousands. What about you, Barbara? How many do you remember pretty vividly?
I would say a handful, just like Sonny said, just a handful.
Yeah, yeah. So let's just let me start the screen share here and pull up that question. And hopefully it'll come up there. How does a good speaker become a great speaker? And I wish we had the time just to sit down around a coffee table and have a snack and actually kick this around. But here's one possible answer to that I will offer in a graphic sort of way. How does a good speaker become a great speaker? There you go. This is you coming out of the box right here. Yeah, right out of the best practices box. That's you. And one possible answer to that question is that the best speakers make the best use of the best practices. And when they do that, they've earned the right to stand at the front of the room. This is a presentation that I literally think I have been training for the last 50 years of my life in order to give this 45-minute session to you specifically because of who you are and the role that you play now as the next generation leadership. And one of the great things about this program, well, the topmost great thing is whenever I saw that Ray Ledgerwood was at the hub of this, I've never seen him at the hub of anything that wasn't done excellently. And then the second thing was when I got to drilling down to the website and got to your bios, I literally felt like I knew each person in the cohort pretty good. And the thing that really jumped out to me was that each of you had a life value quote that I'm figuring that you identified and had put there. And that really opened up a lot of your mind and your heart to me about that. I have a life value quote, but I'm not going to share it with you right now. Right at the end before I sign out, if someone will remind me, I will share that life quote. And I'm going to ease into this presentation with a big quote. A guy by the name of John Maxwell. Many of you probably have heard of John Maxwell. It's written extensively. And a few years back, he didn't just hit a home run. I think he hit a grand slam. He synthesized, distilled into one word what he believes is the best synonym for leadership. And I'll have to say, again, I think he put it over the fence. John C. Maxwell said, leadership is influence. Nothing more, nothing less. And as I have absorbed that over the years and thought about it, and then compared that to what Kouzes and Posner says about leadership. They are some of the big gurus in the world because they wrote the book Leadership Challenge. And I think about what Kouzes and Posner says, that there's 4 things that everybody wants in a leader. Honesty, integrity is number 1. Number 2 is forward-looking. Kind of like what Wayne Gretzky said, you know, out of hockey, I skate to where the puck is going, not to where the puck is. And obviously you're that kind of person. And then a person of inspiration who can get other people to follow. And then the 4th thing was competence. And I think what he is saying in influence is that all 4 of those are distilled in that one word. In fact, I woke up at 3 o'clock this morning thinking about Walter Cronkite. Now, that's a news guy from another generation, my generation, that you've probably heard of, but I grew up my young adult life realizing that the reason he was called the most trusted man in America, the reason that when he ended his broadcast and said, and that's the way it is, and America tuned in, is because he had proven his honesty and integrity. He kept his personal life from being a shambles. He always came on so calm, and through the chaos of the news helped you believe there's a cosmos out there, not just chaos. He was such a consummate professional at the microphone, and he had all the facts. He had a team of people feeding information. There you got it. Honesty, integrity, looking forward, inspiration. He wasn't a rah-rah speaker, but inspirational. And then he spoke the truth. He had the facts. And I thought, that's influence. That's you. That's what it takes. Now, there's another interesting thing about that. One is, although I never met Walter Cronkite, I felt like I knew him. I had a relationship with him. Everybody who watched him over the years did. Walter Cronkite never got around to looking up Randy Frazier and getting to know me and making friends, but that's okay. I already had looked him up and was friends with him because he was a public speaker. He had impressed me with all 4 of those things, you see. Now, there's another very interesting connection between that word influence. And I'll just say on the front end, influence is everything. All of those qualities of a leader in one thing, when you speak at the front of the room. There's another fascinating thing that connects that word with the biggest news story in the world today for the last 6 months. You just can't go anywhere in the world and not hear them talking about the pandemic. And I'm surprised really that no one has made a bigger deal out of this, but did you know that the word influenza is an Italian word, started being used about 1743 when there was a big outbreak of the flu, what we would call the flu, where we get the word influenza, in Italy. And they didn't know what was causing it. They just knew it was highly contagious. People were getting it from other people. They thought it was some kind of force that was flowing into them because of astrological arrangements. And so they called it influenza. And that is precisely where we get the word influence, something flowing in and flowing back out. Think about that just for a moment. Influenza is successful because it's able to infect other people. The same thing in a positive way. And by the way, COVID-19, the reason it's a pandemic is it's extraordinarily good at infecting others. People don't even know they've been infected, in fact. Now, compare that to the word influence. And you see, influence is successful because it affects others. That's a pretty awesome idea if you think about it. So now let's drive a peg there. We'll talk more about influence perhaps at the end of this. Step out on the stage of life and see how this happens. That's you on the right-hand side, and that's one other person that you know. And there's 3 stages here in the first part of speech development, and that's the first part. It's the idea, the concept, the mission comes into your head, may even be assigned to you as something that, wow, if I could get that in that other person's head, their life would be better. All of our lives would be better. Wouldn't it be great if I could flip a switch and just have that idea settle into their brain? But you can't do that. You have to go to the next stage. The next stage is where you really begin to dig in to what that mission is. You develop what I call the super saturated mind, and that's where the heavy work is. You start reading, you start talking, you start getting all the information you can. People think they dread speaking because of the delivery, but actually the hard work we kind of dread, if we've done much of it, is getting ready to deliver it. If you have due diligence and being clear on what the mission was, and now you've got it deep inside your head puts it together and you're ready for D-Day. The time comes when you put that idea in full bloom. And by the way, ideas don't fully bloom until you have fully put them into words. That's the power of writing and speaking. It clarifies what you've been thinking in the mission. If you've done your job, when you put that out there, it goes into the eyes and the ears of the other person, and it begins to replicate literally the dendritic connections of their brain with what's in your brain. It's funny. We talk about things and say, well, you know, it's not brain surgery. Well, it really is brain surgery. We now know that when you change someone's brain, when they start thinking and centralizing around a concept at a microscopic level, literally the dendritic connections between the neurons in their brain change. And they do start resembling that pattern that was set up and sent to them. It's literally nano-neuro brain surgery, if you will. Now let's say that this speaker, you, uses the best of the best practices. When you do that, you have gotten the edge on amplifying your influence, because you're no longer doing brain surgery with one person. Now you're doing brain surgery with a room full of people. Your content has become contagious, and that's how you move the needle in the big game. Now I need to tell you, we keep talking about best practices. Not all best practices are created equal. That may or may not surprise you. And so drive a peg there, we'll come back. Let me say a word about the 80-20 principle, which probably you're familiar with, frequently called the Pareto principle. Pareto, first part of the 20th century, he was a macroeconomist. And it's interesting, we tease economists about being bean counters. Well, let me tell you, this guy was a pea counter. He actually noticed that at the end of his pea harvest, 80% of the peas came from only 20% of the pea pods. Now, that may make you think a lot of things. One of the first things I think of is Pareto needed a job. but beside that, you know what? He discovered something fascinating. As he dug into economics, he discovered that the 80-20 ratio shows up over and over. It may not be a clear break line, but it is seen over and over again. Generally speaking, 80% of the profits come from 20% of the products. 80% of the taxes pay for about 20% of the people pay those. 80% of sales are made from sales force, only 20% of whom are producing 80%. When you got dressed this morning, it's a pretty good guess that you chose clothes that 80% of the time are picked from 20% of what's available to you in your closet. It just shows up. 80% of your best results tend to come from the top 20% of best practices. That has some pretty big ramifications. Let me illustrate it to you this way. You're familiar with what a speedometer is. This is Frazier's speakometer here. And my theory, if I'm correct about this, is that if you take best practices and you drop that siphon hose down in there, we used to call those Arkansas credit cards. If you take the top 20% of best practices and siphon it down into that tube, you will get most of the results. Let's see what happens. Oh, look at that. How did I know that? The best of the best practices gives you the most benefit, the biggest bang for the dollar. What about the rest of those best practices, the other 80%? Well, we're going to spend 80% of our time talking about the most important 20%, but we're not going to ignore the 80% because you can't move the needle from better than average to great unless you also understand the 80%. We just won't spend as much time. So let's see what happens if we fill the tube up. And you'll notice as we fill it up with the rest of the best practices, it's no longer very clear. It gets a little murkier as you get to the top. And that's because some best practices that are great for Sonny and Ray might not work for me, and vice versa. And so it kind of spreads out, and that's the reason you have to work really hard for that last 80% to get the last 20%. But you see where the needle went? And if what I'm saying is correct, and I have found it so anyway, let's just look at that tube and say if you were able to put a partition in there between the 20 and the 80%, and we're able to reverse the suction and siphon out the most important 20%, let's see what would happen if we do away with the top 20% in the tubes. And I really was tempted to give you a sound effect here. Imagine a slurping sound. Well, yeah, because you see, if you take out the most important of the best practices and have the other 80%, you're not going to be happy with the results. Now, let's go back to where that peg is that we drove and look at these first 3 stages in what we're calling the big picture of speech development. And to make it easier, we're going to put them in the right order and we'll label them. Now, don't panic because you think we're just going to go by this too fast. We're going to show you the framework, and then later we'll come back and peel back layers on each one. The first one, though, is the biggie. That's the mission. That's the mission. You've got to know what it is you're trying to accomplish with that speech. And the reason so many speeches get lost in the weeds is somewhere along the line they get off mission and they're talking about everything in the world, and at the end they try to bring it back. You've got to be clear on the mission. And I've got a great quote for you. This is a Stephen Covey quote. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. And the speeches, if you remember, I promise you, are the ones that people have a clear idea of where they were going, and they made it a compelling thing for you to understand all the way through the speech. They did a good job with their mission. You can't do a good job with the rest if you don't start with the mission. And then you get to the supersaturated mind part. That's where the hard work is done. That's where you have to sort and bring in the data, and we're going to talk about how to do that. But let me give you another quote. And I love this quote too, because I put it up there. Organizing is about picking and placing the right points in the right order. And I cannot tell you how your brain does that. All I can tell you is that that's the way the human brain works. You have to keep putting stuff in the hopper. And you wake up, usually first thing in the morning, and you'll find a synthesis happens and things start making sense. We'll talk more about that. And now we come to the part that everybody thinks is the speech, but it's not. D-Day is the delivery, where you've been clear on your mission, you've organized it, and now delivery is pretty easy. Now, let me show you what happens, because if you've done due diligence, and you've done the mission and the organizing, that's where the pent-up energy is released. That's where the whole room begins to have that nanoneurosurgery in their brain, and they get it. And you've brought it to them with poise and confidence and humor, and they leave the room with their brain different, and their actions will be different after that. All right, now let's just slide those first things over. The things, great things come to free, right? That's what you taught us all, and you're right. And it's funny because the first 3 big things overlaps with the last 3. The middle thing is what starts the last 3 as well. After delivery, you separate the amateurs from the professionals. And I love what Barbara said, and she was talking about mistakes, because you see, a lot of people just get to one and done, and after they do the speech, they're thinking, thank goodness I don't have to do that again, but you will. And so to make it work, you have to do a very serious critical analysis. You go back and you listen to the audio, you go back and you watch the video, and then there's a particular type of evaluation you have to have, because you can't fix things that you can't find. And when it comes to your mistakes, you're blind. Here's another great quote, and I think you'll appreciate this, Cassius, because I'm quoting our friend Ken Blanchard. Feedback is the breakfast of champions. And then there's one last stage of this, you see that little repair person? Oh, got some zip in his step. He's got a toolbox full of tools to adjust. Back exactly, Barbara, to what you were saying. You haven't learned until you've learned what to adjust, and you haven't learned until you actually make the adjustment. Now, it may not very quickly come to your attention whenever you think about those stages until I put them all on the same page. And when you see them together, it's pretty obvious. I've just described for you the model for success in becoming a great speaker. Here's your big bonus of the day. That model works for everything you do as a leader. And we'll expand on that, but it's pretty simple. You can see it. Everything falls within a framework. And if it were easier in some way to have a framework to build success on, you would have found it by now. start with a mission, you organize, you deliver, and you're not through. You evaluate and you do the little tweaks. Now, I think we're at a point where I want to stop the share and ask you to, there we are, reach over and pick up your dime for me, will you? And hold it up to the camera. Unless you are different than the overwhelming majority of people on earth, you pretty much did all the same thing. You probably reached over, put a finger on that, pulled it to the side, and you held it up just like that between your thumb and your index finger, maybe the first two fingers. You're going to remember that. I wouldn't be surprised if from now on when you pick up a coin, you don't go back and say, oh yeah, that's what Frazier was talking about. You have to make your concepts contagious. And what I'm going to do in the next few minutes is give you an example of contagion. I'm going to share this model with you in a way that I think will, well, at the end of it, I think you're going to know it like the back of your hand. And so let me go back to our share just a moment and point out something philosophic here. I am told that the three big things that many anthropologists say make us unique as humans is number one, our brain. It's not like any of the other brains on the planet. Number two, the ability to communicate. And number three, it's rather interesting, it's the human hand. I mean, we're not the only thing that has a hand, but we've got the best hand. Because you see, the hand is what made it possible for humans to make tools. Now, again, you're going to know this like the back of your hand. There's an architecture to the model, and it's perfectly replicated in your hand. It starts with your thumb. And you notice the thumb is different than all the other digits. It is really the thing that you would found very difficult to pick up that dime if you didn't have something to hold it up against. And that's what the mission is when you do anything. Whatever project you're working on, whatever you pick up and choose, you always hold it up against your thumb, and that's how you can tell if it's graspable. Okay? The thumb is the point of saying what I'm doing against the mission to see, is this what's real useful? I love quotes, and here's a great one. The first task of the leader is to define the mission. You see, that's the very first thing. Clarity, being able to know what your mission is. We'll come back. Again, this is a framework, and we'll peel back layers as we go through this. But the mission is unique. Second thing, you notice that your index finger is your pointing finger. You've all done that. That's the finger when someone asks you to point to something, you use that finger to point. It's the finger you use to pick. It's the finger you use to choose. And it's even the finger that you'll use to thump things aside because it's your index finger. I mean, forgive me for being a farm boy, but it's your trigger finger. It's the heavy lifting finger. It's really important. It's where the real work gets done. And that's what I'm telling you about the organizing. You have to pick and choose, pick your points and put them in the right order. And then you get to the tallest finger on your hand because it's longer, most prominent. If you hold your hand this way and move it into the future, it's the first part of you that makes contact. That's why it's perfect for representing the delivery point. That's where all that pin-up work of holding it against the mission and the delivery as it held up against the mission, suddenly that all makes sense for it to be the tallest finger. You see the architecture of that? And the amateur stops at that point on top of the mountain. They stop, drop, and they may or may not roll. But the professional gets to the top and realize there's two more stages you've got to go through. According to piano teachers, the weakest finger on your hand is your ring finger, not your little finger, your ring finger. This is a perfect analogy because we are married to the idea that we don't have time to do evaluations. We're wedded to the idea that we're better than we are. But you are not a professional. You're never going to be great in anything until you learn to go back and evaluate. And then you get to that last little digit, right? And that's where you learn to adjust. That represents the little tweaks, the little adjustments that you have to make. But you cannot do that accurately until you have evaluated. You cannot evaluate, most people will not evaluate until a good delivery has been made. There you go. And I'm telling you, you now know that like the back of your hand. I told you we're going to do this framework. Now let's go and peel some layers back. Let me give you a philosophical again about the mission. When I started, I thought, man, I'm going to tell them that as you build your speech, think of it like a building for people to live in. And then I realized I had it completely wrong. It's more like a song. Well, see, a building is something they live in. A song is something you want to live in them. You're composing a song. And the reason I wouldn't ask you what were your favorite songs is we would still be talking about that. Your favorite songs are songs that mix your brain with your heart. And if you have a speech that's all facts and figures and all brain, people will go away and many of them say they have no heart. But if you're just crying the whole time and you're talking about emotions, you have no facts. You're all heart and no brain. The songs that you like are the ones that tell the story and engage your brain and embrace your heart. And that's what you do with your mission. You have to shape it so that it's the right song for that audience, that place, that time, and their circumstances. Now we go back to this idea of clarity. And I have Einstein's picture there, but frankly, he probably didn't originate this. He's credited with a lot of scientists are credited with this. It's the need to be able to explain something simply. And many people will say, if you've got a great speech, you need to be able to say it clearly in one sentence. What this quote is if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. If you find that sometime, when you start with a process and a mission, can you say it simply in the old words, the best words, as Winston Churchill would say? All right, now let's move from the mission to that hard part of organizing. And this is where you are trying to figure out, where do I get these data points? How do I get that? And obviously today you've got search engines, magazines, books, articles, but by all means do not forget to talk to people. And by all means talk to people who are on the other side of the issue. You want to know what their side of the issue is. And by all means, listen twice as much as you speak. Thank you, Cassius. Thank you, everybody. You have to listen more than you speak and know what the other side says. And as you're assembling this material, you're looking for one thing and one thing prominently. Learn the stories. Because you don't have a long time to speak, and the stories, frankly, in my generation, the story is the part that people will reach through the window and turn the antenna so they can bring in the channel again. They want the story. One of the great ways of getting people's attention is simply say, let me tell you a story. Now, what do you do when you get all these points together? You email them to yourself. 50 years ago, Dale Carnegie, How to Win Friends, Influence People with Public Speaking, he said use envelopes. Let me tell you what's better than that. When you find information, just take the time to email that to yourself. Make the little note, email it to yourself with an identifiable, searchable word in the subject. That way, at your leisure, anywhere in the world, you can get your email, you can filter for that word, and all that information that you got on that subject can be put in one place. When you do that, you're going to find out that you've got a lot of stuff to pick and choose from. It'll look like this pile of Post-it notes. Now, I can't tell you how the human brain does this, but I know your brain does it well also. You have to sleep on it literally many nights. You have to digest it, talk about it, think about it, walk the talk about it, and eventually you'll start discarding some of that. And the quality of your speech will be measured by how much good stuff you didn't have room to put in that speech. And you see the architecture of that speech? It has to start big, end big, and keep them close together. So you're ready to build the block outline in the organization. And we could call that the beginning, the middle, and the end, but we're not that mundane. We call it the grabber, the gripper, and the grower. There's a whole art and science to the grabber, but you want people to stay with you from the beginning, and so you start with a grabber. Long pause. I wish you could have been there. You've got them. Now you tell the story, you say. And then the gripper is the logical progression, and you tell the stories that tell that. And then, of course, you complete it with some challenge for them to grow, a call to action. There is another approach to an outline. We don't have the time to discuss it, but I will tell you I've used it successfully, and that's a mind map. And rather than talk a lot about it, I'll just quickly show you one. This was made several years before I wrote the book on what I've learned from 9,000 years of farming. And the brain of a human remembers symbols and pictures better than it does words and numbers. So this map represented a pathway that I had memorized in my head and could pull up much easier than a textual type of an outline. We could talk more and more about that, but let's move on quickly. In organizing, there's a reason it's called the best practices, right? It means you have to practice it. Now this will shock you perhaps, because Mark Twain wasn't just a great writer. He probably made as much or more money in some respects as a speaker, and everybody heard him speak, and he was hugely entertaining and informative. They thought he was speaking off the cuff, and he was not. Mark Twain said, "It usually takes me 3 weeks to prepare an impromptu speech," and he wasn't kidding. In fact, Twain, in his book talking about how to be a storyteller, how to give a speech, he specifically says anyone who's going to give a speech on anything to anyone owes it to themselves and their audience to write it out and memorize it before they give it. Wow, think about that. And of course, there's a great quote from a wonderful writer by the name of Anne Voskamp. Lives on a farm with her family in Canada, wrote this remarkable book, and said this amazing thing. Practice is the hardest part of learning, and training is the essence of transformation. You're not going to be good at your speech unless you practice it. Well, where does that leave us? It's time to deliver the speech. You've done all that hard work with the mission. You held it up against the organization. You can visualize now that the math is there. If you've been clear and concise in the mission, if you've done a good job with organizing, you're just releasing pent-up energy whenever it's time to give the speech. And that's the reason those speeches are going to go well. Before you leap tall buildings in a single bound, I just want to remind you of a few little kryptonite minefields out there. We won't spend a long time on it, but one of them is try to avoid ethnocentricity. That's a 50-cent word, but you understand what it means. Try to come to grips with the fact that everyone else in the world doesn't necessarily look like you, act like you, talk like you, think like you, and has your values. And if you make the assumption that they do, frankly, you're going to be kind of offensive to them. So, and by the way, that's why this picture of you as a speaker is a very androgynous red or gray figure. Think about that. The other thing is to learn to avoid dog whistle words. George Bush, whether he meant to say it or not, but when he invited after 9/11 for the world to join him in a crusade against jihadists, the Muslim world only heard the word crusade. You see, it means something totally different for them. And avoid time problems. Wow, which we're really going right along to point out you should anticipate AV issues. If you do not believe in the demonization of audiovisual equipment, it is only because you have not dealt with enough audiovisual equipment. If you can, ask for a corded mic, because the best speakers know they will give you the fewest problems. And while you're at it, get there the day before, go through the program. When you get 500 or 1,000 people in the auditorium, it not only changes the ambiance, it changes how radio frequency moves about the room. Anticipate that and check it out ahead of time. The microphone is your friend, learn to use it. Remember that great Billy Joel song, The Piano Man? And there's a line in it that says, the microphone smelled like a beer. Have you ever noticed that singing artists and real speakers almost make love to the microphone? They hold their lips right up next to it. You can whisper when you do that. And whispering is how you get their attention. And you pack a PFD. That's just a flotation device of an index card that has the block outline and the main starting points. Right? Simple. Now you tell your story, and what's your story? Listen to the great storyteller, Steve Jobs. This is how important the story is. The most powerful person in the world is the storyteller. The storyteller, sets in the vision. They establish the vision, the values, and the agenda of an entire generation to come. Pretty powerful, huh? Telling the story. So if you took those three elements and you put it in the speakometer, guess what? You're going to be better than average every time you step onto the podium. I mean, you're just going to be good. But we need to bring in the other computer guru for evaluation. I love what Bill Gates said. Second most wealthy man in America. He and Melinda have been giving money away right and left. Jeff has kind of got ahead of him. He says your most unhappy customers are your greatest source of learning. And that's why you need that crucial evaluation. And you need a particular type of evaluation. You need anonymous evaluation. You ask your friends, how am I doing? And you know what they're going to say. Most of them will say you're doing fine. It's only when you let them take off any fear of repercussion or hurt feelings that people can tell you what you really, really need to hear. You can couch it and say, you know, I need your help. That's a great way to start a speech, by the way. Help me find the three things that would make this a better presentation. And then there's not much to say except adjust, adjust, adjust for the rest of your life. All those tools are adjustment tools, right? And the last one is an adjustable adjustment tools. You adjust, you learn how to make the speech about them. No hound is interested in a hunt he ain't in on. I like what Douglas Coupland said. He's an artist writer, and he says, I always think of words as art supplies. You'll get better at picking out the words. Practice with your webcam. Just turn it on and answer a question every day, and then play it back. See how you're doing. Humor, let me just suggest you go out and buy the Audible book of Steve Martin, Born Standing Up, and listen to it. I've listened to it a few times. It will change your understanding of humor for the rest of your life. Humor is your barometer to tell how warm or cold the audience is, or if they're even with you. Because if I'm wondering, I'll say something that I know is funny. And if they don't laugh, I better slow down and reconnect and get them to move the antenna. I better tell them a story. A lot more could be said about humor. Be comfortable with engagement because you're now the expert. You have sat there and assembled this, and people respect that. Remember, honesty, integrity, forward-looking, inspirational, and competent. So you can look them in the eye. Plan your pause because your pause is important. Just listen to great storytellers. And I will send you a quote later this afternoon where Mark Twain talks about how delicate the pause is and how to use it. Listen for tonality. Most of us sound best when we lower the tone and the pitch of our voice. Walter Cronkite, John Wayne, just think about lowering the pitch. You won't do that until you've heard yourself many times. And then, of course, eschew obfuscation, which is that silly way of confusing people about what you're saying. Make things clear. Don't speak in acronyms. Don't try to wow people with these complex notions. The main thing is to keep the main thing the main thing. The first job of the leader is to define the mission, help them know where you're going, and keep holding it back up against your thumb. Am I on mission? Am I on mission? Did I get the mission across in evaluation? How do I adjust this so I can do a better job with that? And for goodness sake, let me stare. For goodness sake, learn to not make the mistake of putting too many words on a slide, and worse yet, writing them in such a ridiculously small font that it's difficult for you and the audience to read, much less comprehend. And of equal importance, don't be so stupid as to think it's okay to read all of that verbiage to your audience, because it essentially demonstrates you don't know what you're doing. The rule of thumb is use pictures as much as you can, as few words as you can, and don't put anything up there that's less than 25-point font. Bigger is a lot better. Wow. You put that in the speedometer, there it goes. You do all the best speakers make the best use of the best practices. And we've skimmed across the tops of best practices, but we spend 80% of the time on that first 20%, the mission, the organizing, and the delivery with enthusiasm. Then you evaluate, and then you learn. That's pretty remarkable, isn't it? Which brings us back to the place we started. How does a good speaker become a great speaker? That's you in the box. That's you stepping to the front of the room. You're at the podium. That's you. And as my dear friend Ray Ledger would say, is always have some takeaways. So I've got 3 for you. Takeaway number 1. Ready? Influence is everything. Remember what we said. Honesty, integrity, forward-looking, inspiring, competent. But you see, all of that really comes down to influence. Think of not just your speech, but your life as a way of influencing. It's not that influence is everything, it's that everything affects your influence. Influence is everything. Number 2, use the model. Use the model. If there were a simpler, cleaner, more memorable model for success in life and whatever endeavor you're going after, you would have found it by now. Trust me. Use the model. It's, you know, I like the back of your hand. Now, the reason that I have to think just a moment and pull myself together before I cover the 3rd point is because I've not touched on the 3rd point in the past 45 minutes. I have lived on the 3rd point for a 30-year career in conservation education and who I am and my values. And so I haven't touched on that. I think I know something about your brain and your heart and know where you are about this. And frankly, it's why I really needed to share these things with you today. Here's the 3rd point. Natural resources can't vote. The air, the water, the forest, the fields, the prairies, the mountains, all of those things, you know, that you care about and that you're trying to make productive and make wise use of, they don't get to vote. The executive director of the agency I was with for 30 years, Richard Davies, told me this, and I've never forgotten it. When he said, Frazier, you're on fire to save the world. But he said, let me remind you. And he said, when you talk about what you're going to do with all your time and resources, natural resources can't vote. People vote. And leaders can affect how people vote. When you speak from the heart, when you speak from the depths of what you believe, it will come through. I promise you. I leave you at the conclusion of this 45-minute session with the inspiring words of Baba Dion. In the end, we will conserve only what we love. We will love only what we understand. And we will understand only what we are taught. You will be great teachers. May God bless you in that. And that said, believe it or not, we're just about minute for minute on where we need to be. I'm going to stop, share, come back, get my composure and a stiff drink of water. And Sonny, open this up for Q&A.
Thank you. Great presentation, Randy.
Oh, wait, I can't hear you. Oh, thanks. I heard that, but I couldn't hear you.
Oh, great. Thank you, Randy. I know I have a question, but I'm curious. Anybody else have something they want to ask Randy right now?
Oh, Randy, I'll say, very interesting. I enjoyed it tremendously. I learned a lot. And it's funny because you brought a lot of past presentations forward in my head, just speaking of some of the things that you're talking about, some of the things I've done wrong, some of the things I had to recheck for the next one. But living here in Rhode Island, I'm between New York and Maine, and I can give a presentation in New York, and I'm speaking at a different pace than when I go up Maine. I gotta slow it down a little bit. And the funny thing is that in learning these techniques is that, in practicing, you get all amped up and you're pacing back and forth before you kind of go up on that stage.
Yeah.
And when you get up there, you know, only then can you really sense, you know, the pace of your audience, you know.
That's right.
And then you have to kind of like either tune it up or tune it down, depending on
That's
the
exactly right.
yeah. So thank you for that. That was awesome.
It's like playing a musical instrument, isn't it? You have to kind of get in key. By the way, you know, there's a reason they call it a keynote. And it's a reason why it says that speech sets the tone.
Yes. Yeah.
And there's a reason why I say that it's not like you're building something for them to live in. You're composing something that will live in them. And again, think about your favorite songs. And I know why they're favorite song of yours. They engage your brain, they tell a story, and they touch your heart. They embrace your heart. And a great speaker has to be able to do both of those things. And you're exactly right. You have quite a wide range, and you have an enormous amount of experience in doing presentations, interpretive expressions. And I hope to meet you someday and share some experience. I'll shut up and listen to questions here.
All right, likewise, Chief.
Who's next?
Randy, I'll make just I think your points about ethnocentricity, I had to think about what that meant, so I'm glad you explained it, is important and challenging today, especially, I mean, even as you described practicing with your husband, right? Or your wife, you said your wife, right? So you have an audience that, well, again, no, and there's no harm intended, but it's easy in today.
Yeah.
Up, right? With so many different lifestyles, etc., identifications and so forth.
That's right.
I find, as I listen to your presentation, how it applies to what I'm doing with grant writing. It's the same idea, right? Board meetings. And I find it tricky to navigate having, you don't have a homogeneous audience, right? So
exactly.
Whether it's whatever term you want to use, I have traditional farmers, I have urban farmers that don't enjoy some of the same benefits, but you want them to have the same goal because for whatever we're doing. And it's very difficult. I don't dispute the need, but it's very difficult to craft language and examples that will resonate with both. So you end up, for me, using examples that maybe are non-farming, right? How do we get to the denominator, the highest or the lowest, depending on your point of view, to bring them together so they don't focus on their differences? And that's hard.
If it were easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yeah. Right. No, I appreciate what you're saying though, because
and that's what we call know your audience. You really have to, because a lot of times you won't know that there is a dog whistle word out there that doesn't mean the same thing to you or some people, but some people will. Mm-hmm. And there will always be a certain number of people who will, it's kind of where we are today among every group, political, ethnicity, among every group, there's a few people who are eager to be offended. And they will let you know.
Of course.
Just try to embrace them as best you can.
Right. Right. I appreciate what you're saying though. Thank you.
Thank you.
Randy, not a question, but just really appreciate these tools that you've given us as framework. I think it's a great framework for us to take back and practice and put into practice to utilize some of these different. I took some notes. I'm looking forward to hopefully if you can pass along the PowerPoint as well, because there's a lot more that I want to look back on and take from. But thank you very much for this, because it's going to be a great opportunity for us to practice and learn more of how to grow in our public speaking. So thank you very much.
Thank you. And I don't know if you've got your envelope and your note card, but those of you who have your little packet, by all means, open it up. And by the way, it probably hadn't gotten there yet, but Jeremy and Carla also have a license coming to them. And Ray and I are very much brothers in spirit, because we both know you need to not only teach the head and touch the heart, you have to put something in their hand. And that something in the hand, and if you've opened it up, you'll see you have a personalized license to not only become a great speaker, but an exceptional leader. And you'll see those 3 points and that great Baba Dion quote on the back. And then you've got some other little graphics there. And you will get this PDF format of 6 cells per page. And I believe Sonny, when they get this all cleaned up, we'll post it to a YouTube. So I'm excited about, like I said, I spent 50 years in training, in preparation to be able to spend this 45 minutes with y'all. I'm really grateful to Ray for opening the door and pulling me in.
So Randy, Mark Masters here. What's your life quote? We never circle back to that.
Oh, because you asked, Mark, I will tell you. Life is the school. Love is the lesson.
Good.
6 words. Wouldn't mind having that as an epitaph, just so that everybody knows that we're here trying to learn something. And you get to be pretty far down the road before it finally dawns on you that cohesive force that makes it a cosmos and not chaos is love. And life is the school, love is the lesson. Thank you, Mark, for letting me say that.
Well, and
Randy, I just wanted to be the first one to get that sticker when you get that quote out. So the first one to purchase one of those. I think that in this day and age, we could probably hear the world if we had something like that on everybody's mower. I had an opportunity to attend several leadership courses regarding communications, and your presentation is hands down absolutely the best. Layman's terms where anybody and everybody can understand, and it's easy to remember. I will definitely use this one from this point forward.
Thank you. You touched my heart with that. I appreciate that so much, Phil. I really do. Thank you. Anybody else? Got 5 more minutes.
Right. I wanted to say one more thing, Randy. There was this time when I had, well, I guess I wanted to, because when you guys were talking about ethnicity, my ancestors, and they didn't write anything down. A lot of things was all done orally and storytelling and passed down through generations.
Exactly.
And so when I'm getting in front of the tribe assembly to speak, I know this going into it. Well, this one particular time I had to speak in front of a whole bunch of elders within our tribe, and I spent the whole night trying to figure out, this is my practice, on how I could give a speech with them actually telling me what I was telling them. So, so I can't tell my elders, they have to tell me. So I had to kind of translate it into a way where they was actually telling me back what my mission was, And I tell you, it was very challenging. But some of the points that you hit on really struck a nerve with me as well, because I could really feel, your experience and the time that you put into to put all these in order. And I'm not taking anything away from you, Ray, because you have a gift to gab yourself.
Thanks. You got a discerning eye. Us old people who speak in front of groups and interpret things, we have a brotherhood, sisterhood. We have a common understanding of kinship. And I must tell you, from the heart, Cassius, from the time I've been a small kid, I've had a great identification and a deep appreciation for the Native American culture of this land. And I was so thrilled to make acquaintance of you and see what you're doing. And if I can ever be of any help to you, let me know.
Thank you. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Looks like Ryan's been trying to jump in too, Sonny.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
right.
All right. Well, all right. I just had a quick question. Do you have a favorite icebreaker or joke that you'd like to start a speech with, or do you change it for every single occasion?
It gets moved around a lot. Now, there are a few things that just work. Occasionally, it's a good idea to write an intro for the person who's introducing you, and let them know that what's important is not that they introduce you, it's introducing the message, because it's not the messenger, it's the message. But people will largely ignore that. They'll just throw it away. And they'll pull up a bio off of the website or something, and they'll just go down through, they just wear it out. Well, if it's the right time of year, particularly if it's near the national election time, when they finish that, when I come to the microphone, I just have a long pause so everybody settles, and I just say something like, after hearing all that, I just want to say, my name's Randy Frazier, and I approve this message. Or you can say something like, man, after all that, I don't know about you, but I cannot wait to hear what I'm going to say. And it always needs to be something self-effacing, something that, the joke's got to be on you. It's not about on someone else. And then sometimes, again, you'll have some audiences that, Ryan, they're going to be laughing at anything and everything you do. And the room is warm and you can't lose there. And you'll have other audiences with the same presentation, the same timing and everything. Not a ripple. It will make a professional speaker weep sometimes when you get in that. And that's the reason I say y'all listen to what Steve Martin says about what people don't understand is that Steve Martin bombed so many times and failed so many times, but you never hear about that. But he reads it to you and tells you about his history and what a science is. And see, he never really got to enjoy the humor he was using because his mind was a microsecond in front of the audience's reaction, judging the next thing he had to say. So humor is really interesting and complex. And you, like Cash is saying, you got to get the temperature of the room to know how it's going to work. But no, there's not a set line, but you do. Here's a keeper. Always know verbatim the opening to your speech. Just have it down, memorized, so that, as Mark Twain says, it comes across as impromptu. But it is such a confidence builder. It's like playing a sport. After that first whistle and the first contact's made, you're in the game, but you're nervous up to it. So it's such a confidence builder to know exactly, word for word, how you're going to start. And the same thing at the end. Because the two parts of the speech that people will remember is how you start and how you stop. And if you grab their heart in between, they'll remember that. And what's often said is they may not remember what you say, but they will not forget how you made them feel. Wow. Ray, I've gone a minute over my allotted time, but I thank you for that. Sonny, did you have any closeout question for me or Ray? Or I know I need to let y'all go.
Jeremy also may have one, Randy, if he's still on with us. And both Sonny and Jeremy's reaction. I'm yielding to Sonny and Jeremy.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, and excellent presentation, and I think the visuals are ones that what is it? 80% of people learn visually, so that's a huge part of it. And so, I guess my question is a little bit related to that. So in this day and age, a lot of us end up giving a lot of presentations in this format, right? It's virtual, so. A lot, obviously all of your concepts for that model apply really easily, but do you have any recommendations that would help a little bit? Because it's different, you can't just look out on a sea of faces and kind of read the room quite as easily. So what's your advice for people who are in the position of giving these kind of presentations in this new virtual format?
If you can, get to know them before the monitor comes on. And so aside from the fact that I just impressed the socks off me to read the bios, I really did want to know Barbara and Joe, and I wanted to know everybody, Phil, beforehand, and you can't do that with Zoom always. But as much as possible, you may be able to get the emails, and I thank you for giving me the addresses and emails to reach out and let them know. And it is awkward even to the point of national news. If you'll notice, when these news anchors, the Walter Cronkite wannabes of today, they're not sitting at the same table many times. Communication is more difficult when you don't get to read those little nuances. You can tell someone's about to speak, but you can't in Zoom. So practice, 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 and do a lot of it. This is not the first time I've ever been on Zoom, but it's the first kind of webinar type thing I've ever done on Zoom. And again, it was personally, to me, important. I will also say this about presentations. Obviously, I spent a ridiculous amount of time making these little guys do what I wanted them to do. I'm sorry, little androgynous beings doing what I want them to do. And there's a website that most of those I got for free. PNG, write me and I'll send you a link or I'll tell you where to get it. Just never forget that long time before we had Zoom or PowerPoint, and Cassius, you can really appreciate this, the most important person was the person at the campfire, because they were going to tell you something that make your life better or maybe save your life. And so the storytelling tradition goes way back further than writing. And I know one really super speaker with the National Speakers Association I really admire, and he says, I use very little PowerPoint because it's that radio thing. He says, if I am telling the story, I can't possibly paint a picture on the screen as clearly and unique to them as they will if I describe it and they paint the picture and I just use the words. So the campfire storyteller is supreme. You don't have to have PowerPoint if you're a good storyteller.
Great advice. Thank you. Jeremy, do you have any comments or questions for Randy?
I think the only comment I had, I really appreciated the quote on leadership, that leadership is influence. And I think that is very true from my experiences. And influence, it really only occurs through effective communication. So I like that. It resonated with me a lot. And I think, that certainly, I think, underscores the fact for good communication, clear communication, but also not being afraid to communicate. And sometimes, difficult issues can almost be paralyzing. And, I think that's one of the marks of strong leadership, of being influential, is being able to communicate through those situations and still have a clear message, salient point, a clear vision for the future. So really enjoyed the presentation, Randy. It's always good to hear from you, and you always inspire me. But yeah, that was one of the strong takeaways for me.
Well, I just appreciate that so much. And to your point, I was seeing this just the other day about that business of the difficulty in today's environment of communicating. And part of the problem is that we're part of a generation that was, at least I speak for myself, my wife's generation, we were raised where, well, we just kind of, we don't talk about that. We just agree we're not going to talk about politics, we're not going to talk about religion, we're not going to have those difficult conversations. When what we would have prospered from is to have been taught, this is how you have a difficult conversation without offending or being offended. And it's a skill set, and one that I recognize the CEO knows how to do that, or you couldn't be the CEO. You know how to have a difficult conversation. You can't just pass over things. So you are.
Maybe some days.
No, you're an excellent communicator. And I will remember that session in 2016. Thank you for reminding me of it, Jeremy. Well, I have used up more of your time than I know I was supposed to. But you all have my email address. I mean it when I say, if there's ways that I, within my realm and means, can assist you, let me know. You will be great teachers because you're going to be great speakers. You're already good speakers. You're going to be great. Thanks again, Ray Ledgerwood. I bow to you, my guru, and thank you so much, and wish you Godspeed, all of you. And we'll talk again another day. I'll sign out.
Okay.
Thank you, Randy.
Randy.
So appreciate you. Very good.
Yep. That was really wonderful.
Appreciate
So we would be remiss to not have Ray piggyback on all of the great content from Randy and for him to address the top 10 tips on public speaking. So our
Be on there, Randy, if you want to for this. You won't want to miss it.
Randy,
Okay.
you can stay. We'd love to.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm in.
Okay.
So we started our journey together, the cohort, with this quote from John Quincy Adams that Sonny gave us. And so I place it back up on the screen. And let me make sure that I've got the screen rolling. Is it rolling?
Yes.
So if posed with a 5-minute opportunity, Sonny, you set the timer on me. Make sure I hang in there right. The top 10 +1 tips for public speaking that I could offer to you. And this follows Randy's basic format of write a few things down, cross out the things that you didn't think that the audience really needed to use. And so these are the top 10 things I have for you following up on Randy's presentation, taking nothing away from the outstanding presentation we just had. Getting to know your audience is a part of that mission related, that model that Randy gave us, but you got to know that audience very quickly. And Randy spoke about that throughout the course of his presentation. Knowing that audience will help you with what audience change in behavior you want to have. So if it's influence, and Randy's PowerPoint, showing the one individual and then the influencing that was going on, what kind of change in behavior do you want from that critical audience? Don't be caught in the trap that you're trying to reach the general public. There are publics within the general public that you want to at least talk about. Think about this. An audience could be all food consumers. Dang, right? All food consumers. And that's a big audience with some of the things that we do in conservation. And what do you want those food consumers to do? Support conservation. So how do you get the key messaging, right, that Randy was speaking about, the top few messages that you want to do? And, I'm a big power of 3 person. You've heard me talk about that a lot. But how do you plan those key messages, as Randy gave you tools today to do? He mentioned when it gets to the real practical side of thing and the preparation and whatnot, what do you need to do? Check the logistics, check your setting, check the audiovisual. And Randy mentioned, until you get there, right, you really don't know, and you really can't read that entire thing, but do as much prep before. Go down the night before, the morning of, check to see what microphones you got in front of you, the audiovisuals working, things like that. Here's the Garth Brooks worst seat. Randy wanted to know what this was. So Garth Brooks was known before he would do a concert to go to the worst seat in the house, what he deemed to be the worst seat in the concert hall he would be giving a concert at. And what he wanted to do is sit there and imagine Garth Brooks playing to that worst seat. So when he was actually playing music, he would play to that last seat, and knowing that he could capture everyone else in between. So the Garth Brooks worst seat, go to the worst seat in the house, imagine yourself at least working with that group and presenting to that group. You want to encourage good audience participation. Randy did an excellent job sharing with that today. He wanted, to know a little something about you, and also ask you 3 questions, power of 3 again, but you could ask your audience 1 question even before you dive into a big old speech and whatnot. What is the key things that you want me to speak to today, and get a little bit of encouragement and audience participation? Well, several of you mentioned this, and Cassius, I think you mentioned this too. Sometimes you just can't, you got to know that you're going to read the audience during the presentation. Am I going too fast, too slow? Am I hitting the right notes here? Are they absorbing it, or are they just fiddling with stuff on their in front of them? Use good stories and examples. Can't really emphasize this too much, but Randy did an excellent job of giving us the idea that the storytellers are so important and picking those stories. And with experience, you're going to experience those stories you want to keep in your hip pocket, right? One of the things that was kind of interesting to me was, what is your go-to line? When I worked for NACD and even for the State Conservation Commission, I'd walk up to the podium and I'd say, I got the best job in the world. I get to work with you, the conservation district officials in America. And what could be better than working with 15 to 18,000 dedicated individuals to conservation and their 7,000 or 8,000 employees? I couldn't be more proud to be standing here in front of you, you know, and have that honor to address you today. So, you know, and then I would sprinkle in a couple of stories about this and that, you know, that we were doing. Encourage the audience questions. One thing we didn't talk about today, that I became an NACD regional representative. I became Mr. Post-it card, Mr. Note card, because I'd go sprinkle note cards all the way through the whole audience, right? No matter whether I was talking with 20 or 200 or 300 or 400 people. And I would encourage them to write down something to me, a question that they wanted, and have somebody go around and collect those questions that we could address. Sometimes people wouldn't speak to it. They didn't want to embarrass themselves by verbalizing. I'd always take the verbal questions, but I would encourage the written ones too. Have 3 go-to items. You know, the power of local conservation through conservation districts was always one of mine. And then I could sprinkle in a couple others right after that. The honor of being able to serve 3,000 conservation districts across America and their hardworking district officials. I think you could pose that at the state level, the local level, and the national level, no matter what audience you're speaking with. And I would always go to that one if I was shoved a microphone in front of my face, you know, and expected to public speak, you know, on the impromptu. How important the 3,000 conservation districts are across America. Now, you heard Randy's, right? Randy had those 3. He has more than 3. He's got a whole bushel basket full of them, but he keeps 3 of them for every audience that he comes to speak with. Then the one thing, as part of the evaluation, you know, and learning portions of model that Randy gave you today, if you commit to follow up, if you're going to commit to something, make dang sure you do. So your truth, your word is your bond, right? And so you want to make sure that I'm going to send you the PowerPoints, or I'm going to get those to Sunny, or I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. Make dang sure you do, and that people know about that. So there's my little pitch for you, and I can stop sharing now. There's a
Good job.
How did we do? How close to 5 minutes did we hit?
You were 37 seconds over.
37 seconds over.
Somewhere like that. Just kidding. You did great. You did great.
Anyway, so there
Thank
you
you,
go.
Ray. Excellent. I'll sign off. Let y'all go about your stuff. We'll talk to you another time.
Oh,
Thank you
hey,
very much,
before
Randy.
you sign off, Randy, if people wanted to have you come to a state association meeting or something, how would they best contact you in regard to that?
Just through the website, or just send me an email. I mean, when you get old, you know, Ray, you have to have an easy email. Mine is mail@randyfrazier.com.
Yeah,
So,
and it's on this little card you sent us all, right?
yeah. All those cards have my email on there.
Randy Frazier. So if you want to send a thank you about today, or communicate with Randy in some fashion, you know, a group that he would do this type of thing with, you know, I'm sure he'd appreciate that. So rather than you beating your own horn, I get to beat your horn for you.
You're a good man.
Well, you're a special friend, Randy. We really appreciate your time you spent with us today.
All right. You take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Thanks, Randy.